Graziano and Zion Memorial. He's also the father of myself and Vin Jr., the grandfather of Vincent, Emma, and Mia, and the husband of my mom. But he's the author of The Family Jewels, which is his second novel. Admittedly, I did skim through the first, don't remember all of it, but I read this in its entirety and a lot to talk about. So, hi, Dad.
Hi, Jen.
Welcome on the air.
Thank you. We actually thought I worked for you.
Yeah, well, only on paper. I want to talk about the book because I really, not because you're my dad, but this is incredibly well written, and admittedly I read it in a very short period of time, but I'm a prepared interviewer. I want to talk about a little bit about there are people who don't know that this is a not so hidden talent of yours. I've watched you do this, and it's amazing when you watch somebody just engrossed in a computer screen, but it flows from you so naturally. There's a story that you had to tell inside of you. But talk a bit about your passion, your craft, and how long you have been writing.
Well, I've been writing ever since I could write, I think. I've always liked to write. High school, that's what I like to do. It's as you said, a passion of mine. I don't know how good I am at it. I don't know if I am any good at it. But it keeps me sane, basically. And I'm basically a binge writer. As you said, once I sit down, I could go on for 3 and 4 weeks and just staring at that screen, and then I could put it away for a month or two, and then come back to it. So it's I have other things in my life that keep me busy, so I'm not able to give it all the attention that I would like to.
It's always a good time when you're writing because you can really slip anything past it, a raise, a change in ownership. Like, that's the time to deliver news when you're writing.
Sign these papers.
Because you have no idea what's going on anywhere. So, no, it's always a favorite time of mine. This dates way back. I mean, in your earlier years, you are a graduate of Pace University. You were an English major. And not many funeral directors of your generation are, in fact, college graduates holding a Bachelor of Arts. You were the first in your family to go to college, the first of 5 children to go to college, and your second funeral director in the family. But you wrote a screenplay years ago. It's something that the original work was A Grave Situation, which is in the drawer somewhere at the funeral home. Maybe you can touch that up now that you have some street credit here.
Well, that turned into Die Laughing, which was the book that you did not read yet.
2009 was a tough time, Dad. There was a lot going on. Brings us to today. So I want to touch upon the subject of the book. Now, you will tell me this is, in quotes, loosely based, very, very loosely based, in fact not based at all upon your life and the dynamic of your brothers with your mother. You yourself are admittedly left out of the book. However, after reading the book, the one thing that I kept finding was I felt as if you were talking about Grandma, and every time I read about Maddie, the mother character, I actually always saw the name Gemma in my head. Gemma was my grandmother, your mother. You've really captured her, and that overwhelming concern, if not panicky concern, that a mother has for her sons, and that concern followed them through their whole life. The story, without giving it away, because we do want to encourage people to purchase the book on Amazon or stop into the funeral home because we do have a lot of copies there. The story is loosely based on the connection, the bond, and the interactions of 3 brothers who travel very different paths in their life, but they all end up, 2 of them end up back at Mom's house, and one of them, who never went far from Mom's house, remains there. But it's the dynamic, the interaction. It really is a tale as old as time in terms of feuding sibling rivalry, but at the end, how they band together, watching the interaction of a mother who still tries to care for her sons, and a mother can care for multiple children can't take care of one mother. And there's some vignettes about growing up in your old neighborhood. The book is based on the Lower East Side, Mulberry Street. That's where you hail from, and that's been really the makings of your life. That was the most solid bedrock foundation that everything has been built upon since. Talk a bit about your inspiration in writing this, and go a little further to connect the dots of your book.
She did read it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. See, Gerald's nodding. I did.
Well, It was, you know, every time you write, all the people you write about, the characters, somehow you've come across these characters in your life, and you put them together. And in this case, I put them together in this crucible of the same apartment that they grew up in. And that stemmed from a lunch I had down on Mulberry Street a few years ago during the Feast of San Gennaro, where I met people walking that had never left the neighborhood, that their life seemed to be stuck in the same place that it was 30 years earlier. And the idea of putting of these people, putting them in a crucible back where they grew up and seeing what happened, is how this whole thing began. And you're right about a mother. A mother never stops caring for a child, even when they're 55 or 60. You know, they're still children to her, and any parent, I guess, feels the same way. So that was the story. They're forced by circumstance to come together and try to regroup and make something. And it's like rags to riches to rags again. So they're forced to regroup, and hopefully, in the end of the book, they find out that there were more important things than assets and money, and that's the book.
I don't know. I think you end the book by giving a good segue to the follow-up novel to this, when they all end up in Vermont. And I'm sure your wheels have turned in that direction already. You know, Grandma lived for a long time, so you had the privilege of having your mother in later years, and it's very true that a mother still, you know, her children were in their 60s, some of them, when she passed, and that mother's love goes on. But I want to talk about some of the references that, you know, you might get it more readily if you're Italian, but, you know, I don't think it's endemic just to our culture. Every culture has their own idiosyncrasies and habits and values that shape them. For me, reading the book was sitting at the table around the family, because there is that exceedingly humorous, joking banter to the point where it's really, it becomes cantankerous, it becomes agitated and aggressive, but you know you love each other because that's how you show it.
Exactly.
And hearing the banter of your brothers, that was so real to life for me. But you got a really thick skin growing up as a Graziano. You did. And Tim, you got a glimpse of it for the 5 minutes outside. You have to rank on each other. That's just how we interact. That means we love each other.
I didn't agree that this is about my family. You know,
okay.
That's something
loosely
you're
based,
assuming.
Loosely based. Okay.
But you know what? It is about the humor and you know, they're always breaking each other's chops, but when push comes to shove, it's the family bond that shines through in the end, and that was the family dynamic I was trying to get across.
A quick question: did Uncle Johnny's son, Cousin John, read this book?
I don't know.
He might take exception.
Well, that you're assuming it's him.
Right. The other
composites.
John. Yes. I want to talk about some of the references though, because this might inspire people to read it, or if people have read it, it might, you know, they might have been struck by the same tones. First of all, the visits to the cemetery. I want to talk about that because that's not something I feel, and even in the line of work that we do, there's two schools of thought. You either go to visit the cemetery or you don't, and there's usually no in between. But for Grandma, growing up, that was very important. I know for Mommy, that's still important. For you, you made those visits with your mother. We don't believe it's just kind of a place. We believe that we're still physically bound by that place, a place where you can go and have quiet reflection and say a prayer and know that you're physically next to the person that you love. Do you find that to be something that was a part of the culture growing up down on Mulberry Street? Was there more of a reverence for the dead, or were people bonded by that circumstance?
It certainly was. It certainly was. I mean, my mom had to go visit all the graves, and I had to make all those stops. But even earlier than that, when my father was alive, she would make sure he took other people across the street, neighbors, to visit. Well,
because not everybody had a car, and that's a reference.
That's right.
In upbringing, Grandma and Grandpa had a house in Greenlawn, originally Smithtown, so weekends you did go there, but that was an event, going to get the car on a Friday and making that
a garage.
Right.
Exactly.
Making that, so not everybody had that car, so that was key in cemetery transport.
Visiting the graves was a very important part of life.
San Gennaro is really something that, shaped so much of your upbringing. The Festa San Gennaro down on Mulberry Street every September, the Church of Most Precious Blood. That's really central to the storyline here, and it did play a lot in Die Laughing. But in a few words, I mean, how has that shaped who you are? How has the feast been at the forefront of your character?
I tell people I would not have traded growing up down on Mulberry Street for any place in the world. It was a wonderful place growing up. You get an education that second to none, and I don't mean in school. You had a street smart about you that was inevitable. But it was a community. It was a great place to grow up, and the Feast of San Gennaro was so important. An event is like the circus coming to town in another state or another city for other people. But for us, that was a defining element. It was really the New Year. That was what we looked forward to most of all, was the Feast of San Gennaro.
By the way, I love the reference of the Italian wallpaper with the prayer cards, because that's very true. So that is it's not even necessarily an Italian thing, but we see it at the funeral home when people come in and their mother has passed. They saved all the prayer cards that they ever get, and in Grandma's case, they were in fact on the wall of the apartment. So the reference to Italian wallpaper, I thought, was very good and very true. St. Vincent's Hospital, that's now closed on the Lower West Side of the city, that plays a central theme here as well. Did you research that, or was it just independently held knowledge that you had? Is it totally fictitious, the interactions that went on there?
There was a nugget of truth in that, and not the way I worked it into the story, but there was a nugget of truth in that aspect of the book. St. Vincent's, how it closed, and it didn't happen the way I wrote it in the book, but there was an element of truth in it.
There's always an element of something. So I like to say that this is somewhat referenced upon your life and your family, and you distance from that, and you actually attribute more of the story to taking a page from The Wizard of Oz. Can you explain that to viewers and listeners?
Well, the three brothers each have they're flawed individuals, but there's irony in the fact that at the end of the book they overcome that flaw. And Tommy, who I think would be the main character, seems to be the most ruthless or heartless, if you will. He's very abrupt, very aggressive, and abrasive, and I don't know who you would compare that to in my family. I'll leave that to you. And another brother seems to lack courage, and another brother seems to lack intelligence. But the irony is that in the end, when they are needed to band together, we find that Tommy had a heart after all, and Jake found some courage, and Looney wasn't so stupid. He read the New York Times, real estate section.
We'll talk about the characters individually. So Tommy, again, being the lead character, morally compromised, to say the least. But in conversations with the priest, you almost understand how he got to that point in life, because there's a page where he said there's a bitterness that life had created, and life really created his perspective. And the conversation with the priest, he says, your God never revealed himself to me. So, and again, you don't want to give too much away or not have a spoiler alert, but he certainly finds God in the end, and really comes through on the side of God and the side of church. So it's interesting how that conflict does get resolved.
It's a running theme.
He finds his faith.
And the mother says, you know, if you don't feel close to God, who moved?
Right.
And that's the running theme. You know, sometimes you have to leave your heart open, and God will reveal Himself. God winks, I think, is what she says in that book sometimes. God will wink, and that's a running theme as well.
I know, loosely based, even though she used to say that all the time. So different grandma. And then the character Jake, you know, he, again, everyone's a victim of life, so to speak, and a victim of circumstance. Had it all, had everything, and his perspective like that. But ironically seems to lack the bitterness when that was lost and that was taken from him. He maintained somewhat of an upbeat perspective, even though defeated in many respects. In that character, at least, I didn't see the bitterness there. And then in the third character, Phil, or Looney, ignorance was truly bliss.
Yeah, he's not one for drama, as he's described in the book. He still gives signals when he changes lanes. So he didn't like any part of this drama that his brothers would inevitably bring back to his life.
But at the end of the day, he really is the one that saved the day. If by no other means he provided the transportation to
And there's a guy that never liked to drive in traffic, but when his brother called him and said, "Tommy's in trouble, you have to get down here. I'm on the way." So that was a very important part of the book for me. That kind of was very telling. That when push came to shove, we'll get in the car. I'm on the way down.
Is there therapy in writing?
Oh,
is it a therapeutic exercise?
Definitely.
That allows you to work out your own, again, this fictitious.
After this interview, my family may never talk to me again, but I'm probably going to need therapy.
We will disclaim it that we love them all.
How far does this show go?
You got 10 more. You got
Does it go to Long Island? Does it go to Long Island?
Oh, the reach? I don't know. I was going to have Uncle Johnny call in on air, but I forgot to do that before. Talk a bit about the neighborhood, and obviously there was organized crime in the neighborhood, and that's not a secret. That's somewhat of a mystery, not so much anymore, but it was there. But the meetings that took place, with The Sopranos, I feel when that show came out, there was an underlying message, because I actually personally believe it cast a new light on that lifestyle. At the end of the day, although they went about it by unconventional means, it was men looking to take care of families, looking to provide, and it was just kind of what they knew. Everyone's a victim of life, a victim of circumstance, a victim of surroundings.
Well,
do you find truth in that?
Very much. I mean, the book is also about good and evil, a basic theme in the book, and then good triumph over evil. So the evil, obviously represented by Fat Paulie Fazula in this case, and very much so a book about good and versus evil. Growing up down there, the neighborhood, you couldn't help, as you said, know some of these people. We were very fortunate in our family that no one was ever arrested, or everyone did very well in their lives, and never had any run-ins with the law. But it would have been easy to go the other way. It would have been easy enough. We grew up thinking Elliot Ness was the bad guy, in our neighborhood. So that's just the way it was.
And how did the dynamic of the church and Precious Blood? There was, everything was kind of interwoven together. You had the feast, you had the church, you had the organized crime, and while the church is a place of solace and refuge and comfort and faith and consolation, there were ties to that, in fact.
There was also gambling in the courtyard during the Feast of San Gennaro. They ran the gambling concession. But
in true Italian fashion, we won't disclose too much.
Mm-hmm.
Again, for a book that's fiction, as you say, Paolucci's restaurant is a real thing in a real place, and that is my godfather. So
when I write a book, I try to use some names, even of little characters, to make me remember them. I'll use a name like Bella or Angie or something, and these were people that I always want to remember in my life, the old timers. So that's a part of the therapy.
That was Uncle Danny's father. That was Dominic then, I guess.
Yeah, he was the restaurateur. Yeah.
But and you actually you referenced Phil, the waiter, in there too. I noticed that.
Yes,
so Phil
exactly.
got some.
That's my way of honoring the dead, I guess.
No, it's very true. How are your novels different? You wrote one book, and then 8 years later over here with the second. Do you find your style has changed? Do you draw from experience? Were there things that you felt that were left out of the first tale that inspired you for the second? How are these two novels connected? And
they're not actually. I mean, Die Laughing was.
Well, the neighborhood's connected.
The neighborhood, the venue, but the story, it was more autobiographical, I think, about the young man that wants to be a stand-up comedian, and his father wants him to take over the family funeral home.
That's loosely based
on
air quotes, Tim.
I would admit to that.
Okay.
Because that's me.
Because you were a stand-up comedian.
That's what I wanted to do, yes.
And you just took a real sharp 180.
One thing stopped me, I wasn't funny.
Well, Mommy says that, but I still chuckle.
So this has really, except for the venue, it's not a sequel. I mean, it's an independent story.
But how does it change at all between
you know,
one and two?
I don't know. It's you get an inspiration and it, you know, I don't know how the process changes. Just the inspiration that comes to put this story together and these characters in this crucible, that little apartment, and see what happens. And that's the fun part of writing, actually. And there's a third book in my head, and started writing it. It has nothing to do with this one, but it's up here, and it'll.
I'd like to see a political fiction come out of you.
I wrote one actually. I wrote the.
You had there's exactly.
It was
maybe,
prescient actually. It was
maybe you'll
Dixon.
maybe you'll resurrect that.
Mason-Dixon project about the country splitting up into confederations without a shot being fired. But it was an interesting.
It might be time to go back and
like
that. I mean, and I hope people are getting more of an insight to you that there's a deep story behind you and to what brought you here. If anyone's life is serendipitous, I thought it was yours, but it was a series of happy accidents, I think,
exactly.
that put you here.
God has a plan.
So Grandma said, but how would you attribute the Mulberry Street upbringing? How have you brought that with you to Mamaroneck and now Greenwich?
Well, I mean, in a sense, everything I am, I learned growing up. I mean, the respect, we were in the funeral business, the respect for families, the respect for the dead, that respect, you know, what I saw my mom and dad do to help people, to help people grieve, and while they were at a wake, they would cook, and people would come up. There'd be always strange people at my kitchen table, which was small enough, but you grow up seeing them, seeing how they treated people, and how important their job was, if you call it a job, was for people afterward, you know. And you help when you bury someone, and then they thank you because everything was done so beautifully, and those are the memories they're going to carry. And then you get invited to their future weddings and future baptisms. There's a certain bond, a chemistry that is created that I guess is instilled in me, and I'm sure it's instilled in you and Vincent as well.
I would like to think. But you never forget where you came from, and I think that's a wonderful lesson here, and I think that has shaped who you are, and that's led you to shape your children, and now your grandchildren, and I want to talk about that. The book is dedicated to Emma, Mia, and Vincent, your three grandchildren, and Mia actually went to school yesterday and says, I think I'm the only kid in the first grade with a book dedicated to her. I said, well, in this class, I might venture to say that you're correct. Why did you do that?
Well, they are everything to me, obviously. They're my life, and hopefully they'll have a way with words and language, and maybe go further.
Or they'll be writing a book about us that's loosely based, you know.
We better be careful.
I know, like the names will be changed to protect us, but you know, it would be interesting to see. So people now on Facebook, this book has certainly gone viral. We have some great friends, and say hi to all of our friends out there who are watching. I know Flora's got to be watching on this broadcast. Hi, Flora. How can people purchase the family jewels?
Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com. They'll get one out to you.
And you can post a review on Amazon.
You can post
Except if you're a disgruntled former employee, because that happened on the last book, okay? But don't worry, we fixed that, because he had a short stint with us.
We don't mind honest reviews.
Yeah, honest is good, but former disgruntled employees, thank God we don't have many of them. So, Amazon.com, I don't think we do.
I think we do.
We'll talk after the show. But don't worry, I can go on and write a review myself, but might be a bit of nepotism as it was to have you on the air today.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you. About time, I would say.
As Tim could tell you, a lot of people want to come in the seat, but gave up the half an hour for you. But The Family Jewels on Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com, written by my dad, or Mia's Papa, as he likes to be called, pick up a copy. And if you're having a hard time with that, we could always find one for you at Cox and Graziano or in his car as he's driving around and the door's always unlocked. So there's always a way to get your hands on Die Laughing. Dad, I close the show every week reminding people that I'm from Cox Graziano and Zion Memorial Chapel. So just so you know, your advertising dollars are at work. You can learn more about the book and our magazine Coming of Age on www.coxandgraziano.com. Thank you, Dad.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Tim.
And this is Jen Graziano thanking you for taking the time